button,
Yeah.
then it's going to turn on and obviously it's going to start recording. And once you are done with the speaking, you press it back. So it's
Green to go.
Yeah.
You need to. Are you not doing that? Release it.
Sorry? And it's going to go green, so then it's obviously
Live.
yeah, it's live. Once you're done with
Oh, do you know what? I can stick it. It's got a
yeah. So once you're done with the speaking, you can just the button. It's going to be live. Once you're done with 1, 2, 1, 2.
I'm at Summit as well, aren't you? I remember seeing an email.
Am I?
Need to press it on, then you go live once you're done with the speaking.
Hello, hello. Well, good morning, and welcome to the IPA. That's my name and who I used to be. And welcome to Signals in the Noise, 2 hours of veritable and overdue celebration of all things GICs, the data that GICs provide and how we use them to underpin our industry. This, as you'll be aware from the agenda, is kind of IPA does TED does GICs. It's not a kind of common format. We have 7 speakers today, and hopefully there'll be sort of time scattered throughout for some questions. Those of you who are watching online, you'll see there's a chat button, so just put your questions in there. We're taking questions for everyone, apart from the keynote. And as long as the speakers, or frankly myself, don't drone on for too long, we should have some time for questions available. If you're in the room, well done for booking the tickets early, because this is a sold-out event. Because it's hybrid, if I call you for a question, do wait until you get a microphone, and that way people online can hear the question and not just the answer out of context. So let's get cracking. I spent kind of nearly 40 years working in media agencies, and if you were to push me for an anecdotal highlight of my time, I would tell you I once got 2 numbers into the speech of a serving Prime Minister. This was Tony Blair when he introduced the construct of feral media to the world. He illustrated media fragmentation with a few metrics. And one line from his speech, which is still available on the Reuters website, says this: in 1995, over 200 TV shows had audiences of over 15 million. Today, there is none. Of course, our source for that metric was Barb data, and we had put it into a government communications think piece that was commissioned by the Cabinet Office. It was a relatively resonant way of communicating the seismic change in our industry. Over 10 years, change that really illustrated the way in which the world is changing. None of which happened by accident. We created an immediately understandable metric of concentration for audiences, but it was the sustaining of approach and methodology that enabled the rigorous comparison, which when presented in the right context, led to such a resonant way of communicating change. Of course, the source for that was Barb. And Barb, like all of the other GICs, has been forged in the fire of consensus building. But my goodness, when you need to tell a really big picture story, the effort that goes into consensus building really pays off. So we're here today to celebrate the contribution that the GICs make to all sides of the industry. We'll hear from advertisers, from media owners, and from the regulator on how the GICs don't just underpin the day-to-day of what we do, but add enormous value beyond that. And all at a bargain basement, £60 million, including UCOM, and because I know that's a number that needs to be presented with some context, that's just over a quarter of a percentage point of total UK ad spend. But as well as a celebration, there's also something of a warning. Insert your own air quotes. I've got a piece of paper in one hand and a microphone in the other, so I can't. When I say that we are data rich, I suspect many of us are feeling data besieged. And for all of the value that there is, the new value that is being created and will continue to be created by the new data that is coming on stream, we are all at risk of losing the ability to see the wood for the trees, to lose the signals in the noise, in the torrents of data that are coming our way. So I referenced Tony Blair and skip over a few prime ministers, because frankly we should, and come to Rishi Sunak. As you may have seen a few weeks ago, our current Prime Minister suggested or proposed that maths should be a compulsory part of post-16 education in our schools. Now, I'm a STEM graduate myself, so I have a lot of sympathy for improving numeracy as a valuable objective in society at large. I doubt very much that he's dialed into the call, but if you do know him, do pass this on. I kind of think he's missing the point. It's not a party political point at all. Anyone in any subject, pretty much, can learn the mechanics if they have motivation. But the noise and necessity of numbers in our daily lives doesn't make for motivation. We'd be a lot better off if, like all great educators, we created curiosity. If we created a curiosity for how numbers impact us in the way that they're presented, and how we can harness that curiosity to ask insightful questions that enable better decisions. Whether those decisions are in our personal finances, our healthcare options, our political preferences, and, dare I say it, how even we make evidence-based decisions as professional executives, including in media advertising. Now, I can think of no better exponent on the subject of curiosity than author, broadcaster, and Oxford Fellow Tim Harford, well known to, I suspect, most of us as both the FT's undercover economist and, of course, on Radio 4's More or Less new series started yesterday. I asked Tim which number series it was. He couldn't tell me because he's lost count. I also asked Belinda what version of Touch Points we're about to release, and she's lost count as well. They've both basically been going for nearly 20 years. Tim's latest book, How to Make the World Add Up, 10 Rules for Thinking Differently About Numbers, would make a perfect set text for any such course for post-16 numeracy. Tim's here to talk us through how this thinking and his broader experience works in our world, and better than that, he's now going to walk us through the cost-benefit of analysis of what would happen if Rishi Sunak evolved his plan, ditched compulsory post-16 maths lessons for buying every 16-year-old, a copy of his book instead. Please welcome Tim Harford.
Thank you so much, David. Thanks, everyone, for coming. It feels like a tremendous honour to be here when you could all be sitting outside in the sunshine, and yet you're here listening to me. So thank you. I appreciate it. Look, I really feel that I should cut to the chase, and that means I want to tell you where babies come from. You may have your own theories. Just hold them for now. I often wondered about where babies come from. I'm the oldest of 4 children. I have 3 younger sisters. One of them was actually born on my 2nd birthday in a very on-brand piece of attention-seeking. And every time this happened, I would ask my mother, like, what is going on? You know, where do these babies keep coming from? And my mother told me something that I think many parents have told their children about this matter. She said the babies are brought by the stork. So what happens is the stork comes, it's got a great big blanket, huge beak, and the baby is in the blanket and the stork comes, and that is where babies come from. As I say, hold your alternative theories. You may be skeptical about the stork theory. I had a few questions myself, I have to say. But then I looked at the data, and I realized that statistically speaking, my mother was absolutely right. Storks do deliver babies. Let me explain. If you get the data from estimating the breeding population of storks in, say, every country in Europe, and you also get an estimate of the number of babies born in each country in Europe, you will find a striking pattern, what we call in the trade interocular, hits you between the eyes. It's unmistakable that places that have all the storks also have all the babies. No denying it. You might say, well, maybe that's a coincidence. So what you would do is you would run a statistical test. Well, this has been done. A paper has been published in the scientific literature, peer-reviewed, respected journal, with the title, Storks Deliver Babies, P equals 0.008. And without getting into the technical details, that means it's not a coincidence. This is the standard bar that you would expect any piece of statistical analysis to pass. And the Storks-Babies hypothesis cleared that hurdle easily. At this stage, you may be wondering what on earth is going on. Or maybe you figured it out. Maybe you know the trick. So it's pretty simple. Just to think about France, Poland, Turkey. I think the embassy's next door. These are big places. A lot of room for storks, a lot of room for babies. Now contemplate Monaco, Liechtenstein, the Vatican City. Not a lot of babies for various reasons in the Vatican City. Not a lot of babies, not a lot of storks. So what we're really doing is we're measuring whether a country is a big country or a small country. And yet, statistically speaking, I have to say that a lot on the radio, statistically speaking, we appear to have strong evidence for the Storks-Babies hypothesis. So what do we make of this? I mean, this just seems to be proof of what so many people think, which is that you can prove absolutely anything you like with the data. Just torture it and it will tell you whatever you want. And you would certainly have got that impression if you'd read the same book that I read when I was a teenager. It explains a lot about me. The most popular book, the most successful book ever written about statistics. It's called How to Lie with Statistics. The author is a journalist like me called Darrell Huff. It was published in the early 1950s, was reviewed, got great reviews twice in the New York Times. I mean, I struggled to get reviewed once in the New York Times, twice in the New York Times. Sold 500,000 copies, enormously successful book. And How to Lie with Statistics is just full of examples like the Storks and Babies example. Full of fun cartoons, full of jokes, full of quirky maps and diagrams, and just all these explanations of how basically statistics are like a stage magician's performance. Like, sure, go along, have a look, try to figure out how you're being fooled, enjoy yourself, but don't ever make the mistake of thinking that any of it is real, because it's not. It is all deception. And for a final flourish, Darrell Huff gave us the Storks-Babies example. Now, the book, as I say, is very successful. It's very respected among my fellow nerds. And you will learn a lot from this book if you read it. But the more I've been in this game of thinking about statistics, thinking about data, talking about data, the more uneasy I've started to become about Darrell Huff and his little book. And all of the schools of thought that it's influenced. Because it's very easy if you're trying to get people to think about numbers and talk about numbers, where your go-to example is something's gone wrong, somebody made a mistake, somebody messed up, somebody's lying to us. That's where you go. And of course, there are lots of examples of that. I'm going to give you several examples over the next 15 minutes. There are lots of examples of people making mistakes. There are many examples of dishonesty. And what's missing from the book is something very important, which is the sense that you might be able to truth with statistics as well as lie with statistics. I realize that's not really a very grammatical construct. I realize there is no single word that seems to convey the exact opposite of to lie, to utter a true statement, to discover the truth, to find the truth, to produce evidence for the truth. All of these things we can do with good data. All of these things we can do if we collect the right numbers and if we analyze them in the right way. And that's missing from Darrell Huff's book, and it's missing from a lot of the discourse that we have about lies, damned lies, in statistics. So I'm trying to get people to think differently, and normally at this stage, if I were talking to a group of ordinary people, I would give 3 simple pieces of advice as consumers of statistics: to think more clearly, to think more calmly. The questions that you should be asking to figure out whether a statistical claim is rigorous, is believable, or not. But you are not ordinary people. You are an elite crowd, I venture to suggest. And so I'm not going to do that. If you want that, that's great. The book is called How to Make the World Add Up. It's in all good bookshops. please go out and buy copies for all of your friends. Or if it's a little bit too sophisticated for your friends, buy a copy of The Truth Detective. It's aimed at 10-year-olds. My wife says it's just perfect for her. It's got pooping cows. It's got Florence Nightingale. It's great fun. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something else. I want to focus, instead of thinking about how we consume data, how we consume numbers, I want to talk about how we produce them. And I think that we should give numbers a little bit more attention and a little bit more respect. So I want to make 3 points. And the first point is that the production of data is a choice. Let me give you an example of that. I mean, it seems obvious, but let me give you an example to sort of pin this down. So those of you who think back about 10 years to when not the most recent census, but the previous census, the 2011 census results started to be published, you may recall that there was a bit of a fuss, led by gentlemen such as Nigel Farage, because it turns out that the Office for National Statistics appeared to have mislaid the population of Manchester. By which I mean there were about 500,000 foreign-born people in the country that had arrived in the country since the last census, so in 10 years, it's a lot, that had simply been missed by the Office for National Statistics' regular attempts to measure immigration. 500,000 people, it's about the population of Manchester, or Bristol, if you prefer. Personally, I prefer Bristol, but as you wish. It's a lot of people to just not notice have showed up, especially if it is your job to count people, which is really one of the main things that we expect from the Office for National Statistics. So, how did this happen? Well, you could, if you like, blame a fellow called Joseph Varadi. Nigel Farage did not blame Joseph Varadi. Maybe he should have done. Joseph Varadi is a foreigner, after all. Seems a good target. Joseph Varadi is a Hungarian entrepreneur. And about 20 years ago, he set up an Eastern European version of EasyJet or Ryanair. So the same kind of budget airline, avoid the big hub airports, fly point to point, no frills. You know the kind of the business model. And the airline was called Wizz Air, and it was very successful. At the same time that Joseph Varadi was doing this, 10 countries, it was called the Accession 8, the A8, so obviously there were 10 of them. 10 countries joined I nearly put this in a column and said it was 8, and thankfully my sub-editor's like, actually it was 10. The A8 were 10. Anyway, 10 countries joined the EU, it's 2003, if I remember rightly. And so there's free movement of people. So countries such as Hungary and Poland and so on are joining the EU. So you've got this low-cost airline that is avoiding airports such as Heathrow. You've got lots of people who can now move around the EU, try and find new opportunities elsewhere. Meanwhile, what was the Office for National Statistics doing? Well, the Office for National Statistics was counting people using the International Passenger Survey. And you may have participated in the International Passenger Survey. If you walk through Heathrow Airport and somebody with a clipboard politely stops you and says, would you mind answering a few questions? That's the International Passenger Survey. And almost everyone says yes. I guess it's as an airport. You sort of do what people in authority tell you to do in airports. You don't want to make trouble. And so there are all sorts of questions like, how much did you pay for your ticket? Are you coming here for business or pleasure? All sorts of questions. They're mostly focused on tourism. But one of the questions is, how long are you planning to stay? And from that question, you can construct a measure of immigration. So the trouble is, although the International Passenger Survey interviews a lot of people, most of them aren't actually immigrating or emigrating. So you've actually got quite a small number of people who are actually making the decision to migrate. If you're trying to measure a particular bunch of people from a particular country, it gets even more difficult to do. And also, the International Passenger Survey can't be everywhere. So they sample different airports at different times, and they kind of make some adjustments, and they do all their clever things. And while all this was going on, I'm oversimplifying here, but basically, a whole bunch of people were coming from Poland through Luton Airport, thanks to Wizz Air, Meanwhile, the International Passenger Survey was standing at Heathrow with a clipboard. That's what was happening. And that's how you miss, over time, 500,000 people. Now, the critique from the sort of the Brexity wing of the British political system was that this is outrageous. Not only can we not control immigration, we can't even count immigration. But that's not true. We could count immigration, and we now do count immigration. It's just at the time we decided not to. We decided it wasn't important enough. The people who had the power to make that decision didn't make that decision. And so we were kind of bodging it using a survey instrument that didn't quite do the job. And my point here, as I said earlier on, it's a choice. We decide what we really need to know, what we really need to understand, how much money we're willing to put into that decision, and what sort of errors we're willing to risk. And that is a choice that we should be conscious of making. We should be deliberate when we're making those choices ourselves. We should be asking smart questions of people who are making those choices on our behalf. I think many people, even in my home kingdom of nerdland, we tend to assume that data just come from some big Excel spreadsheet somewhere. And like the data are just there, and then the question is, what do you do with it? How do you analyze it? Do you ask the right questions? But the data don't just come from some big spreadsheet in the sky. The data at some point are gathered. And they can be gathered rigorously or carelessly. They can be gathered precisely for the purpose that they're designed for, or they can be gathered for some other purpose, and then you can try and repurpose them ad hoc afterwards. You can spend a lot of money on the effort, or hardly any money at all. There are all kinds of choices that we have to make, and we should make them consciously. The second point I want to make is about trust. So I noticed here, so the joint industry currency, it says here in tiny, tiny writing, but I like it, objective, transparent, accountable. I think that's a great start, because instead of thinking, I wish people trusted us, instead, these words speak to the objective of being trustworthy. You can't actually control whether people trust you, but you can behave in a trustworthy fashion or not behave in a trustworthy fashion, and cross your fingers and hope. What is trustworthy data? This seems fine. Objective, transparent, accountable. I think they're perfectly reasonable principles. Of course, there are difficulties. So with medical data, for example, do you want to be transparent with medical data? Do you want everybody's medical records to be accessible? So one needs to be a little careful about exactly how you think this through. I've been quite influenced by Baroness Honora O'Neill in her writing about trustworthy decisions. So she says that to be trustworthy, decisions should be accessible, like you should know what decision has been made. They should be accessible. So even if you, as an ordinary citizen, can't figure out whether it's a good decision or not, the experts or people you trust, people you might delegate to, they can assess whether it's a good decision or not. It should be usable. So it's not in some unreadable format somewhere. You want things to be machine readable. You want things to be in easily accessible forms and understandable. You just make sense of it. So she's got these different principles that I think work. But let me give you a specific example of this at play in data. So I mentioned medical data. Until recently, what we had was basically all the records of everybody who's ever used the NHS for about 60 years, so tens of millions of people, every medical event, every time they showed up at a doctor's surgery, every time they were diagnosed with a sexually transmitted disease, or went to their GP because they wet the bed, or whatever, all of these incredibly sensitive pieces of information, all just available. And historically, the approach used to be, well, we put them all on a DVD, and we're very careful about who we give the DVD to. That's not really good enough. But more recently, I think we've done better. So some people I respect very much at Oxford University have developed Open Safely. What Open Safely does is you've got all the data in a warehouse. Nobody gets to go into the warehouse and look at the data. It doesn't matter how trustworthy they're supposed to be, how eminent they're supposed to be, how many ethics forms they've filled in. No one gets to go into the data warehouse and just look around because all of the other protections we might have, they're never going to work. Instead, what you have is a system where you can program a little robot. And your robot, I mean, this is a software robot. It's not sadly, it's not an actual physical robot. But you program your robot, your software robot. Your robot goes into the warehouse, performs analysis as you have requested, and comes out and gives you the results. So that protects people's privacy. But here's the other thing. Everybody on the system, and indeed everybody with access to the internet, knows that you programmed the robot, this is what you programmed the robot to do, this is exactly what it did, and this is what it found. It means other people can check. You can't get away with doing any dodgy stuff, but also, let's say there's a programming error in your robot. Well, other people can see that and can correct it, can fix it. Or let's say your robot is very, very useful and somebody just wants to tweak it to do a similar task. So the whole system becomes enormously more usable, enormously more accessible, enormously delivering far more insight, but at the same time protecting patient privacy. So I said I'd make 3 brief points about data. So the first is that data is a decision. The second is that we need to focus on making our use of data and the way we analyze data trustworthy, rather than just hoping that people will trust us. And the third thing is, if you make these decisions right, a small amount of rigor can go an awfully long way. So I think back to the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know what you were doing in February 2020, but a couple of eminent medical statisticians in February 2020 were riding a bus across North London and saying, look at what's happening in Italy. This is going to happen all over the world. And people are going to go into hospitals, they're going to be incredibly sick, and doctors and nurses won't know what to do. And so they'll try whatever they can think of, any treatment they can think of, any protocol they can think of, any drug they can think of. And some of those patients will get better, and some of those patients will not get better, and we won't know, we will never know what really worked and what didn't. And so what they decided to do was to say, we're going to set up a system where any patient who comes into an NHS hospital with COVID symptoms, they will get consent from them or their families, and they'll be randomized into a trial. And we will just, at random, give them treatments that we think might work, or no treatment, because we don't know what works and what doesn't. And we'll just keep track of who gets better and who doesn't, and what the correlation is to the randomized assignment of treatment. And within weeks, we knew, for example, that hydroxychloroquine doesn't work. Within weeks, we knew that dexamethasone, very cheap steroid, is extremely effective. It's not actually complicated what they did. It was very simple thinking about rigorous gathering of the data, thinking in advance. And I spoke to one of the researchers, Sir Martin Landray, about a year in. And a year in, the estimate was that he had saved 1 million lives around the world. I said, what does it feel like to have saved 1 million people's lives? And of course, being British, he's like, well, I'm not sure that it's, in fact, I think it's probably about 750,000 or something. I'm sure. It's probably 5 million now. 5 million. It's enormous. And that is simply taking data seriously, making decisions in advance, being transparent and trustworthy about what you're doing, and being rigorous. A small amount of rigor goes an awfully long way. I don't think we can sit with the Darrell Huff storks and babies view of statistics, that we can't believe anything, that they're always trying to lead us astray, that all you should be doing when you come across data is watching for the magic trick. To be sure, there are tricks. To be sure, we are sometimes deceived. But if all we can think about is that people are lying to us with statistics, we're missing out on an incredible power to understand the world around us. I have said enough. I'm going to sit down. Enjoy the rest of the morning. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. We could listen to that all day, but we can't. We need to move on. So I'm delighted to introduce our first speaker from an agency, Richard Kirk, who's described as the incoming Chief Strategy Officer at Mediacom, which sounds like you're on an approach path to land. But anyway, and previously at Zenith, and he's going to be talking about the role and the importance of data in the planning process. Please welcome Richard.
Hi everyone. Is that working? Is that okay? I've pressed it. It's green. Is that good? Is that good? It's all good. It's all good. All right, how do I follow that? That was excellent. Just to confirm for all the clients in the room, yes, when you start at any media agency, you do get a copy of Darrell Huff's book on your first day, How to Lie with Statistics. It's a required reading. I jest. So I'm going to start with some first principles. Just the incoming thing. I've just started at Essence MediaCom. I am in no way qualified to talk about in detail about how data is used as part of the planning process as MediaCom yet, given that I've been there 10 days. But I'm going to talk in general about how I think data is used in the planning process across agencies based on my experience. So I'm going to start with some fundamental truths that I hope most people in the audience would not argue with or would say are fairly true. Audience data is fundamental to good planning, not just media planning, any comms planning. Audience data is fundamental. The one thing that we aren't lacking as planners is new data sources or places to go and get data from. We've got data coming out of our ears, data besieged, as David said. The third point and the fourth point I think are really important. Not all the data that we have is curated or created equally, and therefore it has different value. And also, we all know that data's seductive. If you, in this room, I'm sure you've all been in meetings trying to sell ideas or plans, and we all know that a good plan backed up with some data sells easier than a truly great plan or a great idea that's just the right thing to do. It always sells easier when it's backed up with data. And also, we all know that as humans, we're not very good with big numbers, and so we are seduced in particular by smaller, more granular data. What stat that I love is that if you counted up in seconds, it would take you 11 days to get to 1 million, but it would take you 31 and a half years to get to 1 billion. And then think about how often politicians conflate millions with billions and the consequences of that thinking. So data's seductive. And finally, media planners, we all have the same maxim. We're trying to get the right reach the right person with the right message at the right time. So in our industry, I think point 3 is especially problematic. Over the years, we've layered complicated systems on top of one another to build more and more audience data that we could potentially use in the planning process. And at the same time, because of the financial benefits to all parties that have built up in that ecosystem, more and more walls and obfuscations have been put around a lot of that data to protect different businesses' competitive advantages. And as a result, I think we're in a place where it's now very, very difficult to understand how each data set we might use is created and curated. Indeed, in agencies, we have incredibly specialist practitioners whose job is just that. But if you're a generalist planner, or a client who's got a lot of things to worry about, it is beyond most people to understand how that data has been created and curated across all the different sources that we could use. And as a result, we've kind of lost sight of the value of audience data in many instances. And because of that, I think that some of point 4 has come into play. And we've started to assume that all data is equal, and that we rely on, and as we rely on data to sell in the ideas and the plans and the projects that we want to pursue, we've been seduced by the more granular data sets, the more granular views of audiences available to us, and we've come to rely on them more and more because many of us have sort of given up on trying to quantify the value and the relative value of each data set that is available to us. And as a result, we've kind of reduced a lot of the audience planning process and the media planning process to rational relevancy. We convince ourselves that we're kind of masters of the universe and that we can reliably put the right message in front of the right person at the right time. A lot of our campaigns are essentially highly personalized in sort of when we're ideating them. We ideate highly personalized campaigns where we're going to target Mr. or Mrs. X because of a piece of information we have about them, Y, in order to sell them product, Z. And I think this thinking has led us to a planning system where, unfortunately, we've gone from understanding audiences to trying to know individuals. And that has led us from trying to quantify the incrementality of what we do, because we all know that advertising is only ever building a small proportion of the sales. We've gone from trying to quantify incrementality to a system that is built on an idea of trying to claim credit, constantly trying to claim the credit for a sale that happened. And as a result, we've gone from something that I thought everybody in our industry understood and knew was a fundamental truth, which is that advertising is a relatively weak force that acts on large numbers of people equally, to a planning system whereby we all seem to think advertising is a highly powerful force that we can focus in on one person in order to make them do something as a result of having seen a piece of communications. And I think if you take all that together, it's why nowadays when you say, I work in the advertising industry, to someone who doesn't work in the advertising industry, instead of them saying, oh, I really like such and such an ad, or what's your favourite ad of all time, they're more likely to say to me, oh, is it true that my phone listens to my conversations so that it can target the ads better? And I think that's a sad state of affairs. So the system that we have at the moment, I thought, doesn't work, and I think the root cause of it is because we really struggle to put value on the data that we're using for audience planning. And I'm going to give you a practical media planning question now, so I want you to all think about this. If I were to ask you, when you buy an amount of digital impressions or VOD impressions from one of the TV companies, or connected TV impressions, targeted on 18 to 34s, how many of those would accurately be delivered to 18 to 34s? And would the targeting premium that you will invariably pay be justifiable versus simply just targeting a broad audience, allowing for the prevalence of 18 to 34s in said media environment? And remember, it's more likely if you buy a TikTok video that an 18 to 34 is going to see that versus, I don't know, a standard VOD impact. And then you've also got to allow for how many people might be watching the impact at once, shared viewing, and how much of the impact is likely to get seen, new research around attention. Now it's taken me 30 seconds to say it, but it is a simple question. It is a simple question, and it should be answerable with a precise pounds and pence value where you can say at this cost, it is no longer worth buying the targeting. I could even give you all the CPM prices that I'm paying for that media, both targeted and untargeted, and you would struggle to answer the question. I know, because I spend most of my day trying to answer these questions. It would take you a fair amount of time to answer. It would involve you paying for more data, and it would be still quite difficult to pull together. So I guess my point is, there are tough but fair questions out there about data that we need to answer as an industry. And that's a very specific question, but there's macro questions as well being posed by things like the changes in privacy, views on privacy by big companies, and the subsequent changes to how tracking happens online, and how your phone works, and how data on your phone works, etc. And instead of moving back towards data that we can value and data that we feel is transparent, accountable, and objective, I think, unfortunately, there's a big push at the moment in the industry to actually move forward into even more obscure and obfuscated data. So, we used to live in a world where a lot of what we did was based upon attributable last click or last touch conversions, and it was wrong data, but it was understandably wrong. Now we're moving, instead of sort of trying to move back from that position as a result of more complexity being laid in, we're actually moving forward into a world where we're having machine learning derived enhanced conversions, because we can no longer count all the conversions on a last click basis, so we'll count some of them and then just guess the rest and report that as being the truth, which I think is an even sadder state of affairs. So I think this is why we must be cognizant of the truths that I started with. Now, we can't change our nature as humans. Data is always going to be seductive to us, and we're always going to struggle to work with big numbers in our minds because we struggle to contemplate them. And we can't avoid audience data in planning. We've got to build planning based on audience data. But we can do more to understand the quality of the data that we use. And that's why today it's great for us to be here restating and remembering the value of the data that's in the JICs and the value of it to our industry. Now, is JIC data fashionable in agencies? Sorry, no, it isn't. Is the data held within JICs likely to help us make a piece of communications highly individually relevant to a person in a way that a performance marketer would be really satisfied with? No, it's not. But can we trust the data and say that it accurately describes the people that we're trying to communicate with and change their perceptions of our brands and sell things to? Yes, we can say that. And when you start to look at the JIC data, you start to see, really interesting things. More interesting, I think, than a guesstimate of what was in my shopping basket last week. Radar shows us how over the time we've had since the pandemic, commercial radio has had an insane growth in this country. It's up 14% in terms of weekly reach. And also, podcasting is like a new way of reaching younger audiences. 1 in 3 people aged 15 to 34 now listens to a podcast each week. I would argue, if you're in social advertising, podcast ads are the purest form of social advertising there is. Forget anything that you can buy on one of the social networks. Podcast advertising is just what social advertising was supposed to be when it was initially created. UCOM gives us a view into the sort of much questioned, highly in-demand world of online video that all brands are very, very interested in at the moment. We can see from UCOM data that YouTube and TikTok, who are big rivals at the moment, and most people in the industry sort of say they're just going head to head. They're actually dramatically different. YouTube has double the reach of TikTok, but TikTok has double the dwell time of YouTube. And yet most planning people seem to just say because the formats look kind of the same, they're basically for the same thing on the plan. Whereas the JIC data would sort of tell us, no, you need a more nuanced approach than that. Based on the statistics I just read out, they're actually for very different things, essentially. And we can use JIC data to see how an event as massive as the World Cup changed the ways in which people in the UK interacted with football content. We can see that there was a 10% growth and then subsequent decline as the World Cup went through the calendar in interest in football online in the UK. Now, for some people, you might think, wow, that's 10% of the population changing their behaviour about what they're interested in for a short period of time. That's a seismic thing. Other people, particularly maybe football fans for whom the World Cup was this massive event, you might think, only 10%, that's not even that big. But the key thing is that you can start to understand more easily, thanks to JIC data, the scale of such large events, and it helps you sort of put them into a bit of context, which a lot of other data sources, I think, don't do. So this gold standard data isn't small, and it's because it's not small data that makes it beautiful, I think. The JIC data that we have access to is sweeping, it's large, it's not focused on granularity. It's focused on the broad behaviours of our population, and it forces us to think not about being personalised, but about being better at predicting. We can say what's likely to happen as a result of JIC data, what things are going to affect all of us, what is changing in how we consume culture, and broadly what the nation's eye is being drawn to, or a particular demographic's attention is being drawn to. And that's brilliant because it's reflective of a real marketing truth, that populations are massive and only quite large, momentous things attract their attention. And it's harnessing those in advertising that means brands have a better chance to be what is sort of a lot of people talk about at the moment, which is culturally relevant. I think a better word for it is just cool. It's much easier to say. And that, I think, sure beats stalking our audience through their phones and their laptops. So today is about giving a shout out and a big thank you to the publishers, the platforms, the people who contribute to our JICs, because in agency land, planning without them would be a much poorer discipline. So thank you. And indeed, by being forced to reappraise the sort of JICs for this talk, I've got to say, looking at the JICs is something that I don't do daily. So by being forced to sort of reappraise them for this talk, it's made me think a little bit about, you know, maybe it is time to kind of slay, or at least rethink the sort of sacred maxim of media planners. You know, the idea that all we're here to do is reach the right person with the right message at the right time. I think maybe having that as a goal or an intention is fine, but then trying to ensure that all data gets us to a place where we can control that kind of delivery is not so great. And so I've sort of proposed that one of my sort of ways that I will think about audience planning going forward is to replace that with the goal of audience planning being to reach big audiences in big moments with big ideas to make big differences to the brands that we work with. And yeah, that's what I will be using JIC data to do as I do audience planning. Thanks a lot.
Many thanks, Richard. So I'm going to introduce our first media owner, but our second, Richard Bond, who's Managing Director of Clear Channel, who's going to talk about data in out of home. I have to say the brief to Richard was show how great the data is from JICs in outdoor. I strongly suspect we're about to get 10 minutes about how the JIC data shows how great outdoor is, but for 10 minutes, that's great. Please welcome Richard.
Good morning, and thanks for having me today. My name is Richard Bond. I am French. I arrived in the UK 25 years ago for what was meant to be a 6-month internship. I fell in love with London, I fell in love with an English girl, and I fell in love with outdoor advertising. Not necessarily in that order. And here I am 25 years on, still very much in love with London, still very much in love with the same English girl. We've got 3 kids also, and still very much in love with outdoor advertising. Today's brief was all around signals in the noise, a guide to media accountability in the era of data abundance. And there is no doubt data abundance is exactly what's out there. And I've been acknowledging this idea that you guys have got choice. And one of my favorite Marvel character is Spider-Man. And Spider-Man always talks about this idea that with great power comes great responsibility. And this idea of choice is such an important one. Over the next 10 minutes or so, I'm hoping to share with you guys why out of home is not only the right choice, but also the responsible choice. So let me start with the idea of the right choice. And I'm going to start with this idea of reach, which was really good to hear Kirky talk about this idea of reach. And as we know that for most brands, the best strategy is to hit as many people as possible. And in a world in which we are finding more and more media fragmentation, which has also been covered in the FT, the great thing about out of home is actually audiences are growing. Our weekly reach is on the up. But also what we have seen is this idea that with more digital investment, that reach is also growing. Digital and data has been disruptive for out of home, but bizarrely, it's been positively disruptive. We now find ourselves that the root data backs that digital out of home now reaches 83% of the UK population. And I think for me, this idea of the importance of reach remains one of the biggest and important signals. And I think it was interesting hearing Kirky talking about what he said, because all of it I felt related in a one way, shape or form to the medium I so much love. The second big data point is this idea, of course, no media works on its own. Again, I've chosen to tap into some very well-known IPA data and going to the much-loved Peter Field, who talks about this idea of how out-of-home boosts business effects of all channels. I'm going to have to tell you what the business effects are, because there are many, many stats there. It's about sales gain, market share gain, reduced price sensitivity, customer retention gain, customer acquisition gain, in profit gain. And what we really see here is this idea that out-of-home is the glue that makes your wider media plan go that bit further. One of the new data points, one of the new signals that is also coming to the forefront is this idea of trust. Trust was something that accelerated as a metric, as an importance during the pandemic, and has once again accelerated through these key moments with cost of living. Unsurprisingly, 70% of people agree that trust in brand is now more important than ever. And for out-of-home, that's actually good news, because out-of-home, you can't tell lies in Publix. This idea of the public promise. One of out-of-home's superpower is its reach. One of out-of-home's superpowers is its very physical nature. And I love this idea that you cannot lie in public. And I think what you find really in some of the work we've done with some of our colleagues at JCDecaux is this idea that actually the more public the medium, the higher the trust levels are. So for me, I think this is one of these kind of big signals that is keeping on increasing. We talk about trust. I often find that, when there is a panel, people talk about trust, they talk a lot about the content, the editorial. One of out-of-home's superpower is we have no content. It's all about context. We have no editorial. It's all about the brands and the context, the high streets, the malls, the supermarkets in which we operate. But I think it's important to talk about the right choice, but as importantly, it's about talking about the responsible choice. And one of the reasons I fell in love with outdoor advertising originally was because of a French company. I don't work there, I work at Clear Channel, but JCDecaux. JCDecaux, Jean-Claude Decaux, was actually born about half an hour away from where I grew up. But I love this idea that there is no media without infrastructure, and no infrastructure without media. And some of the numbers I'm going to share with you now are numbers that haven't yet to be released. It's a piece of work we've done with PwC and Outsmart, which will be released in the upcoming weeks. And it's all about this idea that we're more than just media. We're about infrastructure and this idea of making the right choice. In 2021, still a difficult year for the out-of-home industry, the media owners basically funded 89 million into public infrastructure. Public infrastructure being bus shelters, bike schemes, urban trees, Wi-Fi's, and defibrillators, like the one you can see on the left-hand side. When you actually look back over the years, the PwC work actually showed that out-of-home funded 1.1 billion in public infrastructure. No content, yes, but public infrastructure. In a world in which people want more trust, I think that's such an important point in a data signal that is coming loud and clear. We talked about the importance of reach. I think one of the other big metrics and big key points we're hearing more and more about is this idea of need for inclusive media planning. Well, the great thing about outdoor advertising is that by nature, it's inclusive. The great work from WPP showed that not only is it the right thing to do, it's also very commercially beneficial. And again, the route data from our industry, Jake, shows how every single out-of-home format over-index against some of these demographics. But as media owners, we're also putting basically our media where our mouth is. In 2021, the PwC work showed that the four major out-of-home players donated 27 million to charities in good causes alone. Here on the left-hand side, one of my favorite ones, a partnership, Clear Channel Compass with Jammy, donating free space to basically black-owned businesses, supporting. So really putting, kind of our media where our mouth is. The great thing about a very public, medium is this idea of our reach, is this idea of infrastructure, but with it also comes its own challenges. Our very public nature means that questions get asked around our energy consumption. And I thought, you know what, let's also tackle this up front. And I thought I'd share some numbers, some of them a little bit randomly, in order to put them into perspective. The entire out-of-home industry uses 0.04% of the UK's total energy use. Yet, you will have noticed that quite regularly out-of-home gets discussed as one of these kind of mediums. Also, just to put into context, slightly bonkers numbers, we talk about the bonkers numbers, actually 50 times less energy than the UK household appliance left on standby. This isn't us actually saying, look, but it's about creating context. Out-of-home is also working very, very closely with Net Zero in order to progress our kind of carbon footprint, acknowledging that, kind of might it be scope 1, scope 2, but also more importantly, this idea of scope 3, working very, very hard towards carbon net zero. But our broadcast nature, and this is a piece of work from KPMG released in France, and not dissimilar, not dissimilar media market to the UK, actually shows that in relative term, our very much nature of one screens to 1,000, one panels to 1,000, actually makes us very, very efficient in terms of audience delivery against other medium. So yes, out-of-home can do better. Out-of-home is working towards becoming carbon net zero, but also very, very efficient. And I'm going to leave you with probably my favorite stat. One of the reasons why I originally fell in love with outdoor advertising many, many moons ago. This idea that no infrastructure without media, no media without infrastructure. 50p in every pound spent in outdoor advertising goes back to local transport, local community, in local transport. And I think that's such an important statistic. 50p in every pound goes back to local transport, local council, and local communities. So hopefully, I've kind of provided some signals that kind of show that, out-of-home as a medium is not only the right choice for advertisers and brands, it's also the responsible choice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richard. So, time to give some airtime to an advertiser, to a client. I'm delighted to welcome Chris Laird, who started off in a variety of kind of media companies before going client side, first at Boots, and then for several years, I'm going to say, at Nationwide Building Society, and was a client of mine for some of that period. Chris is going to be talking in a personal capacity, because that's what you have to do when you're working in financial services, but built from his considerable experience client side, talking about the value that the JICs bring to the client side of advertising. Please welcome Chris.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning. I realised I came dressed as a politician today in a suit. So I thought I'd dress a modern politician by rolling my sleeves up and getting stuck in. So here we go. I am envious of the man at the back who's wearing shorts. So, those who cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. As someone who studied history at school and at university, I often use this quote when set a challenge. So when asked to speak today, I thought I would look backwards to try and look forwards. Now, May was a historical month for the United Kingdom with the crowning of a new king. Now, I want to start by referring back to this king, William III. Back in the late 1690s, there was an issue with the trading of beer. Being an advertising audience, I thought a story about alcohol might be of interest, even at this time of the morning. The problem was that there was no consistent way for ensuring that when you ordered a pint of beer, you actually got the correct measure. Some landlords were selling creative measures for the standard pint. So the king and his parliament stepped in, which is why until fairly recently, you would have found the royal crown engraved on every pint glass in the country. Now, the impact of the European Union, sorry, no Brexit politics in this speech, and a marketeer's desire to design pint glasses of all shapes and sizes means this tradition has been something that's been lost. But for centuries, it was an independent, trusted source to guarantee that buyers, us, and sellers, publicans, had a consistent industry currency for drinking. Now, roll forward 200 years or so, and a similar problem existed in the advertising market. with a misalignment between what circulation figures the newspapers were claiming and what advertisers believed. So some advertisers, who became ISBAR, put it upon themselves to seek independent verification of circulation. A court case ensued, but out of it, the Audit Bureau of Circulation was born, the industry's first JIC. I'm delighted to see that Bob Wootton is in the audience. He's even older than me, so if you want a full history lesson about that, having worked at ISBAR, please speak to Bob afterwards. So whilst advertisers are not always at the forefront of the debate about joint industry currencies, they matter, and through ISBAR we're invited to sit on the boards. But with a variety of business priorities, we do probably take them for granted. But they are vital for us to understand audiences, make investment decisions, and trust the decisions we or our agencies make are the best for reaching our customers and giving benefit to shareholders. Or in the case of my current employer, Nationwide Building Society, our members. Working for Nationwide, we consistently tell ourselves and our agencies that we should trust each pound spent as if it is our own. To do that, though, without independent audience insight and campaign verification, those decisions would be a real challenge. Now, the bit that's come to light in recent weeks, even more so since Denise Turner from Root asked me to speak today, is the, how should we put it, lively debate about how to move forward with audience measurement. Wrongly, I thought it was a more sedate part of the industry. But as you can see from some of these headlines, nothing could be further from the truth. Now, an observation I would make is that we have perhaps forgotten the word joint in joint industry currency. Maybe it is naive of me, but I would hope that more of the organisations and their funders could work collaboratively to create more consistent, informed measurement within media and across media. Project Origin is being led by ISBAR as the latest work that tries to build an informed view to help advertisers, albeit that is at a campaign, not audience level. Now, I know it is far more complex now than it was perhaps in the early 1900s with the newspapers. But advertisers are again investing money directly to help a project that should enhance our industry. But clearly the project needs to ensure all the stakeholders involved in it are aligned and understand the inputs and the outputs. And I do appreciate that that is no easy task. I spoke to a few people in preparation for this. One is a small but growing UK media owner in C-Screens. Now, they're an out-of-home TV provider. As you can see from this quote, they accept that independent verification is a cost of doing business as a media owner, and that agencies and advertisers will demand it. It may not be easy for them to prove it, but they do have the likes of Barb and Root to aspire to in terms of standards. And similarly, the IAB introduced the gold standard for online media companies to complete a checklist of requirements to receive validation. Now, I know others may want to debate methodologies and gold standard expectations. But for me as an advertiser, these are two examples where media owners directly, or via a trade body, are willing to commit time and money to enhance their reputation. And for that, they deserve strong consideration for investment on media plans than those who don't. Now, some might say that JICs have become less relevant, as a large part of global media investment goes to some of the tech companies who have been perhaps a little bit slow to support independent measurement. But much of their success has been built on accessible, low-cost, self-serve media opportunities for the long tail of small and medium-sized businesses. Now, whilst those businesses do not have in-house or agency media expertise, or access to as much industry data as many of the people in this room today have, they surely deserve to have the option to access independent validation of audiences and campaigns. And after their meteoric rise, those tech companies seem to be entering a new phase of their businesses and are proving not to be immune to the same economic pressures that other media owners and other businesses are hit with. Reports of mass redundancies and slowing growth suggested to me that things are changing as bigger advertisers start to review their historical investment. Now, my former employer, Nick Manning, who built Manning Gottlieb Media from nothing to a major force in the agency land as part of the Omnicom group, went further with his analysis that came out on Monday. An extract from Nick's article only further emphasises that media is increasingly complex and that expertise and trusted data sources are vital. But even that article prompted a vigorous defence only yesterday from the IAB. As I said, the lively debate continues. Now, I can't speak for every advertiser, but certainly on my watch, most of the media investment decisions that I or my appointed media agency has made over the past 20 years working in the client side have been based on trusted independent audience and campaign measurement. But gluing all this together for us is hard and time-consuming. So, to conclude on a few things. Like it or not, but advertisers fund the whole game that we are all in. And as advertisers, some of them can get quite frustrated and upset when there is a lack of transparency in our marketing processes. It is surely right that we ask any media proposition that they can demonstrate independent measurement of audiences and the campaign information about the campaigns they deliver. And of course, ideally both. It is important to remember that you are not normal. As proven by ThinkBot research, people who work in advertising don't represent most UK consumers. So we need JICs and trusted data sources to make the right decision for consumers, not just what we think. And whilst the last few weeks have been enjoyable preparing for today, it has been time-consuming, exploring the landscape and the massively different opinions that exist. And I can't guarantee it, but I would hope that companies involved in the advertising ecosystem who show a maturity and openness to enhance our collective understanding will win out. So lastly, I understand that media audience and campaign research is both a technical and financial challenge as media proliferates. And I do not doubt the professional standards of the people who work in this part of the industry and the complex working practices that, frankly, my little brain just doesn't understand. But looking forward, we need to work together to crack the measurement and effectiveness challenges of marketing. Without independent insight and verification, those difficult conversations with CFOs about marketing investment only become harder. Remember, every CFO in the country has accepted independent audit and scrutiny of their financial accounts as standard business practice in their own careers. So to gain their respect, trust, and access to additional marketing pounds, we surely must strive for that too. Thank you very much.
Before you run away too much, we've got time for a couple of questions for Christian. Yes, I do. Dodgy bag. So if you're online, use the chat function. If you're in the room, raise your hand and wait for a microphone so someone can so that people can hear you online. But I've got one. So you mentioned initiatives are made by kind of media owners to make things more accountable. We've talked already today about JICs being sort of underpinning and universal currencies. It'd be interesting to know what innovations with the JICs that you've seen in your time that have added value.
Well, probably the most recent one, the one that I got a little bit of credit for, was our work with inclusive planning. So I had the easy task of asking the question, because that's what the clients do, which was how inclusive were some of the media plans that Wavemaker, our agency, were delivering on our behalf. Rachel DeCuna, who's sitting in the front here, so I'm going to embarrass her, and Jenna, who both work at Wavemaker, did the difficult bit. So they took data from the likes of Barb, Root, Radar, Pamco, to name just four, and meshed that data together to try and better understand how we reached those diverse ethnic minority audiences that generally some of the bigger media owners didn't think about. And actually that data was vital. some of the characteristic information is withheld for the right reasons. So the fact that the JICs were there enabled us to get under the skin of that challenge. And even so, we did submit an award to the IPA. Our Wavemaker and Nationwide Tackling Bias in the Media Industry. Unfortunately, the IPA didn't shortlist it. I'm still bitter about that, but as I'm in your building today, I'll forget it for this one day.
Thank you, Chris. Any other questions for Chris? No? Okay, thank you very much, Chris, and we'll move on. Jennifer Carey has done a kind of career sandwich from starting a media owner at Carlton, went agency side, and is now back sell side, where she runs the media planning for Channel 4, is current chair of the Freeview board. So another kind of media owner perspective with the very intriguing title of Altogether Different. Please welcome Jennifer.
Sorry, first fail. Hopefully everyone online can hear me now. I want to talk to you about the role that Barb and JIC data plays in supporting everything that we do at Channel 4, but particularly when it comes to understanding our audiences from a marketing perspective, and reminding us that, unlike those in our media industry bubble, they are indeed altogether different. But first, I want to take you back to the early noughties when I started my career as a sales assistant at Carlton Sales, ITV as was. From the start, I was fascinated by TV data. And I used to hold court in the pub with my mates, asking them to guess, how many people do you think watch The Bill? How many people do you think watch Footballers' Wives? Yes, it was that long ago. And I want you guys to think about what you were doing at the time. How many people were watching these guys on a Friday night on Channel 4? Show of hands? Yeah, much like me and my mates, when we weren't in the pub listening to me bang on about audience data. Yeah, and 2.5 million people watched Friends on Friday on Channel 4 every week. But 3.5 times as many watched Emmerdale. And it wasn't just the oldies. 1.5 times more 16 to 34s watched the Dingles rather than Ross and Rachel. That was my favourite fact that I used to tell people. Yeah, it was that exciting. And audience data has continued to surprise me ever since. People are still watching Friends. Last year, according to the Barb data, it was the second highest viewing minutes on Netflix after Stranger Things. More people watch these guys, combined age, or more 16 to 34s watch these guys, combined age of 140, than watch Love Island. And the #1 programme on BVOD over March and April didn't come from iPlayer or the shiny new ITVX. It was Married at First Sight Australia on Channel 4. So our audience don't always behave how we expect them to when it comes to what they watch. But one thing we do know, how they watch is changing, with a shift away from linear broadcast towards on-demand viewing. 45% of viewing of video in 2022 was to non-linear services. And Channel 4 has responded to this with our Future 4 strategy that puts audiences at the heart of everything we do. And that means reacting to their ever-evolving viewing habits and prioritising digital and on-demand growth while still keeping true to our remit, which requires us to make the kind of programmes that a global streamer just isn't going to make. Barb data has always fueled our understanding of linear audiences, but with the new router meter data, we are now able to see the full picture. Don't get me wrong, our own VOD data is great. It allows us to build rich audience segments for targeting and understand users' viewer journeys on platform. But the router metadata allows us to see that viewing in context and allows us to see our linear viewing audiences compared to VOD, but also what our competitors are doing. The competitive landscape has changed dramatically, and share of streaming is a new key metric. And here, the data surprises again, with BVOD such as ITVX and Channel 4 showing growth year on year, while Netflix is in decline. Channel 4 has made a number of bold moves to keep up with our audience's ever-changing viewing habits. We know from BARB panel data that 15% of video content is viewed via YouTube, so we've struck a deal with them to make our content available on the platform. We know that younger viewers like shorter, snackable content. 4.5% of all video viewing is through TikTok, which is amazing considering it didn't exist a couple of years ago. So we've set up a digital commissioning team to produce short-form programs that live on our social platforms via our 4Studio social distribution team. From a marketing perspective, this is where we get down and dirty with the data. Our owned media has long been our most powerful advertising tool, with an annual equivalent media value of about £320 million. However, its firepower just isn't what it used to be. Gone are the days when we could reach 76% of our population with our Paralympics ad on our owned channels alone. The decline in linear reach has resulted in a greater need to invest in media off-platform and to seek out our audiences in the places where they're spending their time. Take Married at First Sight, a show that started out on Channel 4 as a slightly dry social experiment, got sexed up by the Aussies, re-exported back to E4 as a huge hit, thanks in no part to a 360 media campaign with a cheeky creative spin thanks to 4Creative. In 2022, our brief was to make the show even bigger, but focusing on a specific audience. Through analysing the BARB data, we discovered that although the show did really well, even among 16 to 34s, it was being disproportionately driven by the older end of that audience. By growing the show, we'd increased viewing amongst the young at heart E4 and VOD viewers, driving up the average age of the show. Our brief to our friends at OMD was therefore, without sacrificing scale, how can we make the profile of the show younger and focus on 16 to 24s? Using IPA touchpoints data, OMD could identify media channels that would drive incremental reach among 16 to 24 audiences. We're in a fairly unusual position as Channel 4 as an advertiser because our owned media is measured by BARB, so it can be ingested into channel planner tools and treated as a baseline plan, ensuring all paid media drives incremental reach amongst the particular audience we're targeting. Paid spend is optimized to audiences that aren't exposed on our own channels. As a PSB, we're reliant on commercial revenue, and we need to be able to demonstrate the rationale behind investing in marketing off-platform. Being able to combine own media with standardized data from other channels allows us to show how paid media is necessary for us to reach certain audiences, particularly the young demographic that Channel 4 has a remit to provide for. So did it work? Well, there's an adage amongst TV marketeers, very cynically, that says, if a show does well, it's because it was an absolutely brilliant show. If a show doesn't perform well, it's because the marketing campaign wasn't good enough. When it comes to evaluating the success of our marketing campaigns, we're heavily reliant on JIC data, as the data is both our input and our output. BARB, of course, tells us how many people watched on linear and the demographic breakdown, while Dovetail complements our own VOD data and gives us the full picture of how audiences are consuming our content on our streaming platform. However, as we all know, isolating the impact of marketing activity is really difficult, and this is really true in the broadcast sector when there's just so much other noise that influences what people want to watch. We can use BARB data to see how many people watched the programme, 2.1 million people to the launch, and how many people were exposed to an own media campaign, 29 million people. And we can see the crossover between the two. So 1.8 million people watched the promo and then watched the show. It worked. However, how many people of that 1.8 would have just watched anyway because they're just loyally for viewers, watch the show all the time? What was the impact of our marketing? We also believe that marketing has for a big show has a halo effect on viewing apart from that show specifically. So it drives brand salience and it forces people to think about the channel as part of their consideration set. So how are we going to measure? Given that we're on our way to becoming a digital-first business, for a time there were lots of discussions about direct attribution, given the world of connectivity that big data and social platforms opened up. However, as a PSB and a trusted media owner, privacy concerns prevailed, and we had to explore other methodologies. We had dabbled in marketing mix modelling a few times, and we kept coming back to it as the most robust way of measuring campaign success. We've worked with our partners at OMG and Lect to create a model where the input is our trusted JIC media standard data, and the output is our audience. Quality in and quality out. We're currently developing the model to add in competitor data from Dovetail, because we know that competitive programs have the biggest impact on viewing. There's only so many hours in the day that people have to watch TV, no matter how many hours of Married at First Sight we can make. So, at Channel 4, we rely on trusted industry data to understand our many different audiences' viewing preferences and behaviours, and how to reach them off-platform media activity. But I want you to think about something, because as a creative business, we do always have to be mindful, but that in our desire to be data-driven, we don't lose the curiosity for the spark that can't be measured. Sometimes a great idea is just a great idea, no matter what the numbers can tell you up front. Over time, we at Channel 4 have set up a fake robot store on Regent Street for humans, told people that they can be tracked wherever they go on petrol pumps and cash points for Hunted. And just last year, we set up a fake drugs vending machine in Shoreditch for Make Me Prime Minister. Channel 4 was born to take risks, and that bravery extends to our media choices. Having the solid bedrock of media data across established channels within a plan gives us the freedom to innovate, surprising and delighting our audiences in an altogether different way. We all know that great media planning is a combination of art and science. And when you've got the science side is solid, that's when the magic can happen. Thank you.
Don't sit down, don't turn your mic off, Jennifer, stand back up. One of the things that is particularly is true of a lot of media, but particularly true of broadcasters, is that the JIC data isn't just supporting the advertising cell, it's supporting the understanding of editorial, so the scheduling and the programming itself. What's the nature of the overlap between those two functions, and from what you're allowed to see, what's the different use of the BARB data for the programming commissioners?
It really comes down to understanding the audience. So it's very similar. It's around looking at what people are watching, both on our channels and other channels, and that's why having the competitor data now from the SVODs is really useful. So we're analysing data all the time. And especially when it comes to our linear schedule, because it is still really, really important to us. We know that a big linear launch, while we're kind of prioritising our VOD viewing, we know the power of a big linear launch. Like Netflix would love to have a moment where they could get new content in front of millions of people at exactly the same time and get everyone talking about it. So we're always looking, and so one of the main uses from a scheduling point of view is like, when's the right time to launch a programme? Because as I mentioned, there's only so much TV people can watch. We know if we tried to launch a new reality show up against Love Island, that just wouldn't fly, because we understand that people have only got so many shows in their consideration set. We know when BBC are launching Happy Valley, that's not the time for us to launch a new drama. So we're a challenger channel, so we're reacting to what everyone's doing all the time. So we're looking at those numbers every single day when it comes to making decisions.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Right, so time for our sort of final agency perspective. Rhiann Feather's an OMD lifer from kind of trainee to head of media planning. And as we all know, great media planning has accountability built in at the core, and that's the subject that Rhiann's going to talk to us now.
Thank you very much. All I want to do now is go home and watch the 20 episodes of Married at First Sight I have left, so thank you very much. At one point in some conference, measurement is going to come first, for sure. I know it will. It will definitely. I have been at OMD now for 13 years, and all of those 13 years I have spent looking at data, and I started looking at JICs for sure, and more I go back looking at JICs. There's a bit of a spoiler here in terms of the role that JICs can play in accountability and reporting. They certainly do have a really, really key role. So I just don't want to leave you hanging, but they absolutely do. Media is complicated, and really, really complicated, and much more complicated than it was when I first started working in advertising. I always try and search for a different slide. I keep coming back to this one in 2017. It was made, and I think it's probably because media has now officially become too complicated, and so it is no longer possible to make it fit on one slide. And that complication is only getting more complicated. The media landscape is continuing to fragment. We now, as advertisers and as media agency, have more places to put more adverts. And especially, so those non-commercial environments, we can start testing ad formats. By 2025, it's forecast that nearly 90% of all spend will be online. And it's that online spend that is making it more complicated, because as soon as it's online, there are many, many more metrics that we can that we can look at. And the media plans that once delivered just an impression level now look at rows and rows and columns of data that we absolutely can report on. First-party data is becoming more and more important, and the ability to use first-party data, regardless of the category that we're working on, is just more available. And there's more abilities to use tech partners. So in essence, it's not going to stop getting more complicated. But there is one thing that is still the same, and that is that accountability hasn't changed, and it won't change. Actually, what we need to do is give the evidence that kind of what you've said you were going to do is what you've done, and you did it. And I kind of mentioned just a minute ago, but I think it's probably the reporting element that has changed. Because we can report on so much more, we kind of get into this trap of just doing it. But actually, there's a real kind of role that we play from an agency point of view to really establish what we should be reporting on, and rather than just we can. So with this increased amount of data available, with the amount of investment in online, so the sheer volume of those KPIs, they can come from different sources. They can be different KPIs. They can have slightly different view-through rates. They can have slightly different audiences. So and it's really cool, because what that allows us to do is look at which different audience is working hardest, look at the creative A/B testing, and it's great. It's so important. But we end up comparing apples and pears, which is something that actually as an industry we need to be really careful of, because as soon as we start doing that, nothing ends up making sense. And actually simplifying this increasingly complex world is where the real benefit we find is to our clients. Actually, if all we're looking for here is to understand, has it worked? What should we do different, and how can we change it? Anyone can list off metric after metric, but actually the real skill now, I think, is understanding what has actually happened and for what reasons. And JICs really do have the ability to simplify the complex, to kind of understand and help clients understand ultimately if their campaigns have worked. I'm bravely going to sidebar into a football analogy. For anyone who knows me, this is so far out of my comfort zone, but it's so right, I had to do it. So in football, not dissimilar to media, there are so many metrics. How far players have run, how fast they've run, how many times they've touched the ball, the possession in their half, see, I'm nearly steering away. And if you get really, really obsessed with these facts, you can start looking at the success of players in those ways. However, Messi wouldn't necessarily score, excellent pun, very highly. But if you come up a level and actually just look at the effectiveness or the effectiveness of different players, almost like a Jick of the football world, he is one of the best players. Now, he spends his time walking the field, he spends his time walking into places, he doesn't run, he doesn't walk very far, but he assesses what's happening in the game. Now, without that Jick, he's not doing very well if you only look at speed and distance. So sometimes it's not about using every piece of data, it's actually about using the key attributes to measure, to make sure they're leading you to the correct conclusions. I'll move really quickly away from football, and that can't be a question. So if I think about the things that have the biggest impact on measurement and accountability, I see it as transparency. So without something being transparent, people start doubting it, there isn't trust, no one believes it, and the whole kind of house of cards falls down. From a standardization point of view, if you've got too many KPIs or if you've got too many different things you can report on, it's too hard to compare, and so whatever it is you're using needs to be standardized. Cross-media measurement is something that is somewhat of a passion of mine. I don't try and sit in a pub and talk about it. And I think without the ability to measure cross media, then we're kind of at a bit of a loss. And then lastly, consistency. If I know it's happened today, I want to know what it looked like yesterday, just as Tim was saying earlier. So then if we think about each one of those, and here's the spoiler, Jicks are able to do each one. They're owned by the industry. So as advertisers, as agency, and as media owners, we all have a say in Jicks, and actually that then allows them to be trusted and a source of truth. It doesn't need third-party verification, and so there can't be any doubt. So definite tick on transparency. Then from a standardization point of view, I've touched on this before, but Jicks can provide an unrivaled standardization. They don't have to compare different view-through rates, viewability, or to help combine a media plan. There aren't any nuances between different numbers collected. So they can really provide that all-important standardization to help with the simplification of accountability and reporting. Cross-media measurement. This is a genuine formula. Again, for anyone who knows me, I don't think I've done a presentation without a formula. A genuine formula to estimate cumulative reach. I think we can agree that it's really complicated. And imagine that equation if we're using 10 different media owner metrics that have used slightly different view-through rates versus using one JIC. Now, this JIC can then provide the much-needed simplification in delivering really challenging media solutions. And they are, so the likes of sea-flight reporting, that have really moved on the game of AV reporting. And then, from a consistency point of view, I thought I might be the only one talking about COVID, but I'm glad I wasn't. And this slide took me back to when they decided to actually format their charts of data on the government news bulletin at 5 p.m. every day. Consistency. This is all about consistency. You'd never see a scientific, robust sample based on one single piece of data. You just wouldn't see it. And as we were talking about from a COVID point of view, we wouldn't have been able to predict the trend of cases had we not had this consistency of data. So again, in a kind of a world that's changing, we need that consistency, but not just in real time, but over time. So it's really important to focus on the difference. So those four things, I could have talked at length about many more, but I thought in the art of simplicity and sophistication, I wouldn't. So if you remember just three things, there's so much data and so many proof points, just make sure you're really, really super considered about what you're doing with it and why. don't underestimate the power of a JIC and what it can actually deliver for you and your clients or your media. And there's always room for improvement, but there's no need to start from scratch in lots of this. And lastly, I can talk about football, just hopefully not if probed.
Thank you very much.
Don't do it. No football questions.
I understand football every bit as much as you do, so that's all right. So as a kind of committed user of the JICs, I'm just going to put you on the spot and ask what innovations you'd like from JICs, if you could have anything.
If I could have anything, I think for all of the JICs to really kind of pull together and provide more cross-media applications. And I think the industry is willing to, just as JIC should be, to drive all of the kind of the development from a cross-media measurement.
Cool. I think you'd have many people to kind of agree with you. Any other questions for Rhiannon? Always one. Down here.
Hi, it's Simon Redican from PAMCO with a voice like the Bee Gees. Don't know what's happened to that. I just wondered if you sense any sort of trend that I think for the last few years, trade-in, buy-in has tended to lead the process. I think it's fair to say that. Do you get any sense of a shift back to planning leading how agencies decide where to spend money?
Yeah, so I think there's a really interesting thing and something that happens at OMD. We've got a very specific media planning function at OMD. And you're absolutely right. If there's a big client, there'll be lots of trading discussions. But actually, from a planning point of view and use of JICs, we can get closer to what we should be doing. And we're actually finding that we can unlock lots more extra value by doing audience-first things. So our trading team is always quite interested in us doing some actual work before they work out what the cost is, because actually we are helping them unlock different ways of them delivering value. So I think we're at a precipice, and I think probably the next few years we'll see that maybe shift, and I look to all of the advertisers to help us kind of deliver on that and not just look for the cheapest agencies.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay.
So, yes, a lot of applause. So we've heard from advertisers, we've heard from agencies, and we've heard from the media owners ourselves. We're very lucky as practitioners in advertising to be mostly in a self-regulated environment, but the reality of the world is that there is regulation with Ofcom of the broadcast environment on telecoms and telecommunications as well. So it's really important that we get the perspective of the regulators. I'm delighted to introduce Eleni Maruli, who's Head of Market Development in the Market Intelligence team of Ofcom, to give regulators' perspective of data. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope my mic is working. If they tell me that it is, then excellent.
Oh no, sorry. Carry on, quick.
Carry on. All right. This is me. Excellent. So, hi everyone. I'm Eleni Maruli. I'm the Head of Market Development at Ofcom, and I head up all of our industry data collection in the media and online sector. And today I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective of a regulator's use of data, which is adjacent, but slightly different to what you guys do in the advertising industry. I'll take you first through our remit, what we do, who we are, and why it matters. Explain to you the role of evidence in our policy making and beyond, and all the decisions that we do. And then finally, I'll just give you a few of my thoughts around what we think about the current data ecosystem and what I think is actually a bit of a scarcity in a data abundant era. So Ofcom's mission is really clear and simple. Our mission is to make communications work for everyone. Now, although the mission is simple, the delivery and implementation is not. It's excitingly challenging. It requires and also multifaceted evidence. We regulate telecoms, that's both fixed and mobile, media, TV and radio, as well as post, and most recently, online. And in our plan of work, we group, yeah, is that better? Okay, thank you. Is that better? Sorry, guys. Yep, And we group all our work into 4 buckets. So firstly, we want to make sure that everyone has internet that they can rely on. Secondly, and probably most relevant for here, we enable and facilitate a media ecosystem that we trust and value. Most recently, we are trying to create a safer world online for all UK people, but in particular for children. And finally, we enable the distribution of spectrum to allow wireless services in the wider economy. We have grown quite a lot, actually, in the last couple of years, as our new online duties have started and are going to increase in the next few months. But I still would argue that we're probably best known for our media work. Some of my colleagues might disagree. And again, in terms of the media work that we do, we group this into 4 buckets. First, we look at UK content. We want to make sure that it's produced across the UK and reflective of the diversity of the UK population. Secondly, and I think we mentioned this a little bit maybe earlier, it's around news. News needs to be trusted, impartial, and accurate. We need to enable and maintain a plethora of content producers and content providers and allow them to compete fairly. We feel very strongly about that. And then finally, we want to protect audiences from harmful content while also preserving the freedom of speech. Now, quite an ambitious plan of work, and I think as the broadcasting system modernizes, this becomes increasingly interesting, increasingly challenging. We have the new BBC operating license, which we published this year. The media bill is going through pre-legislative scrutiny to update and evolve the broadcasting system. We're reviewing a lot of our rules and regulations. There's more details on the slide and beyond. And that means that evidence is the key to unlocking these policy decisions. We don't just rely on it, but it's the foundation of what we do. We are an evidence-based regulator, more so, I think, than a lot of our fellow regulatory entities. And that's where the research and intelligence team comes in. We have a very strong team. We invest in it. We have skill sets ranging from data analytics and statistics, industry data collection, market analysis, all the way to quantitative and qualitative consumer research. And in the Comms Act, we have very specific responsibilities around the collection of market intelligence, the conduct of market research, but we go well above and beyond that, and we really use evidence in everything that we do. And I think if you take anything away from today in terms of Ofcom, our key stakeholder is the consumer. It's the people, and it's our job to make sure that the markets, the communications markets, serve them in the best way possible. So how do we do that? We use a mix of data sources, a plethora of data sources, and we synthesize them. So you can see some of them over here. It's a mix of first-party and third-party data. So we do a lot of industry data collection ourselves directly from industry. We take that data, we clean it up, we analyze it, we publish it. We conduct a lot of our own market research to try and understand current consumer behavior, consumer concerns, preferences, et cetera. But we love when industry comes up with solutions, and we would love to leverage even more than what we have currently. We use some of the names that you see here, and we are working more directly with industry to make sure that as they're meeting other goals, they're also thinking about Ofcom's objectives as well. And we publish a lot of it. I think Ofcom's quite unique in that it's a place where you can find information across the board about new technology developments, about the market landscape, about consumer behavior, consumer attitudes. And we do this through narrative reports with a lot of commentary, a lot of considered, robust, accurate commentary, as well as data visualization tools and analytics tools, where you can cut the data in a way that makes most sense for your own objectives. And our audiences are very wide, so we make it accessible and available to all consumers, but we have audiences across news outlets, academics, and obviously industry as well. So it's probably not original to say that new technology, new developments in sort of product launches, et cetera, have changed the way we consume content. I think that's something that has probably been brought up quite a lot today. This means that data methods that we've relied upon for quite a long time need updating. They need innovation. It's no longer sort of a nice to have, it's something that we must do. At Ofcom, we try to triangulate data sources. You can see one of the examples of our triangulation efforts here on the slide, our viewing donut that we publish every year in our Media Nations report in the summer. But there's so much data out there now, right? We're talking about this data abundance. The problem with that, the fact that there's so much data, is that actually a lot of it is what I would call vanity metrics. So these might be metrics that sound relevant. They might sound impressive. But they don't actually tell us much. So I often see in the trade press or I used to see in the trade press, maybe less so now, information about total hours, total minutes streamed by a service. It was usually a big number. It usually would have grown quite a lot year on year or month on month. But actually, what was it telling us? How big was the universe? Is that big number really big compared to the rest of the universe, or is it actually quite small? You know, who was watching those millions of hours of content, with whom, in what context, etc. And so when I was speaking to Justin from Barb Audiences ahead of this event, sort of, we discussed what we thought was more of a scarcity of data, and sort of the Coleridge poem, the rhyme of the ancient mariner came up, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. And it feels a little bit like that with data. Now, not to say that there isn't meaningful data out there, and actually what I would argue is that as analysts, it's a very exciting time for us as a research and intelligence team, because this is an opportunity to try new methods, to think about how we analyze the data more effectively. But as a risk-averse regulator, as we should be, we are a regulator, it means we've had to reevaluate our risk appetite, and we've had to think about how exactly we measure in a meaningful way. So we're trying to move away a little bit from the kind of total measurement piece to meaningful metrics. The reason I have a plane on this slide is because if anyone's ever worked in sort of a consulting capacity or thought about problems from a consulting perspective, you may have gotten a question like, how many passengers flew out of Heathrow today? And if you don't work in the aviation industry, you might think, oh, well, I wouldn't know where to begin, how to find that information. But you might have some variables that might help you. We're asking about a day, so you're time limited, you have 24 hours. You may have been on a plane before, so you might know the average size of a plane. Obviously, that might vary depending on where you're going, or how far away. You might know, if you've been reading the news in the last 5-10 years, the number of runways at Heathrow. You might have a thought about how many planes would have flown per minute in that day. And so there's all of a sudden, all the variables are maybe leading you towards quite a decent estimate. And I'm not suggesting that this is the way forward for everything, but I think when thinking about understanding, and for us in particular, about understanding consumers, this is the way that we can maybe navigate some of the complexity that's been mentioned earlier, some of the changes in our ecosystem, while also producing actionable insight. And so I'll leave you with just some final thoughts. At Ofcom, we really care about what we do, but we also care a lot about how we do it. And so I've tried to group my thoughts in that way. How do we find signals in the noise, right? So firstly, clear and consistent definitions. What are we measuring and why? And more importantly, what aren't we measuring and why? And how do we overcome those limitations? And again, with the mindset of, is there a way that we can do some decent estimates that can help us? Secondly, further collaboration. You might see on the slides, we have all of our Ofcom values. It's our #1 value. We collaborate extensively, internally, but also externally. And the advertising industry has been a brilliant ally here. We love advertising industry data sets. And so we want to do more of that. And you'll see, for example, in the online space, as we take our new online safety duties, we'll look to see, are there any symbiotic relationships we can have across brand safety goals versus online safety goals, et cetera. And then finally, just a plea, about vanity metrics. Let's try and, if we're going to find signals in the noise, if we limit the noise, then it'll be easier to see those signals. And so although they might sound nice, they might be a nice marketing tool to put out there. If we can limit those and really commit to the robust, methodical, and precise sort of integrity of the research and analyst profession, then I think hopefully we're in a good place. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. What have we got to look forward to by way of kind of Ofcom publications? I always used to look forward to the doorstep of the communications and market report, but the world has moved on.
Yeah, no, so the summer is a very busy time for us. We recently published some podcast data from our podcast survey, so if anyone's interested in the audio space, worth having a look at that. We have the CMR coming out, which is our communications market report, which is sort of our cross-sector report where you can find all of our data from telecoms to post to online to media. And then the big flagship one will be at the beginning of August, which is Media Nations. And that's where you'll find all of our latest trends in TV and radio.
Cool. And you may not know the answer to this, so forgive me for asking this, but I do remember a very long time ago the ad industry lobbying for BBC to come under Ofcom remit, which of course it now is. And the BBC are major stakeholders in some of our GICs, most obviously Barb and Rajar, and we all know that the BBC is under funding pressure and remit pressure. From a regulator standpoint that's a data user, and a clear stakeholder in how the BBC works in its commissioning of data, should we be worried about the BBC's commitment to data and their ability to support the industry, the data industry that supports so much of what we do?
Well, look, as Ofcom, we are incredibly vested in making sure that all of our public service broadcasters succeed and continue to provide public service content to UK audiences. In terms of data, I think there's perhaps a question around how do we maintain some of the good quality data that we currently have, but I think there's also, like I said, it's a moment for innovation and creativity, and as we try to join and compare data sets across linear and online, or radio and online, it's an incredible opportunity for everyone to come together and do this in a joint way rather than separately. So, I take your point about the funding pressures. I think that's across the board, not just for data. But I think because evidence, and you can tell I'm biased, this is such an important part of how these decisions are made. I would hope that would be a priority anyway.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So you might get 5 minutes back in your day. I hope that you've taken lots of good nuggets out from today. I'm just going to rattle through the nuggets that I've picked out in the hope that that's helpful to you. We heard from the wonderful Tim Harford that data is a decision, don't we know that in our world, and that trust is a function of behaviour, and particularly relating that to how we underpin the GICs with transparency, objectivity and accountability. And he talked about how a little rigour goes a very long way. Richard talked about data is not created equal, and that's something that we should bear in mind on a daily basis in our trade. Richard Bon, a fantastic tour de force as to how you can use data to provide evidence for every element of your proposition, and to use that data also to drive development as well as current practice. Chris from Nationwide talked to the value of data for accountability, a plea for more collaboration in our industry, or perhaps a renewed commitment to the collaboration that has developed and sustained the GICs this far, and the need for the GICs being never more important. Jennifer from Channel 4 talks about how the GICs really support the contextualisation of the first-party data that they have, so the decision-making that they do is always robust and underpinned, and how they use that data to drive incremental reach. Rhiannon talked about GICs as a vital tool in simplification, in how we create strategies and how we make those strategies accountable for advertisers. And lastly, Eleni talked about scarcity in a data-abundant era, and the warning from Coleridge, data everywhere, nor any drop to drink. So with that, just a couple of house notices. Do, if you haven't already, book yourselves in for the 21st of June launch of Touchpoints, Wave, whatever it is. It started in 2015. It's still great. Links to all of the GICs and answers so many of the cross-media questions that Rhiannon was talking about. And soon in your inbox, it's been written, it hasn't yet been designed, is a paper on some of the issues today, which will almost certainly be called Signals in the Noise, written by Justin Sampson, Chief Executive of Barb, with Tony Regan, always really kind of thoughtful authors in this topic. So with that, can I ask you to thank the speakers and have a great day.